Well, good morning, everybody.
Hey, John. Hey, everybody.
Morning.
Mr. Woodturner's weekly coffee hour number 62. We've been doing this every week for 62 weeks in a row now. I see them still clicking in. We're coming to you from our new meeting space at the Kaufman Kitchens workshop here in New Holland, PA. We're up on the second floor, which is a big unfinished space that they plan to use for future expansion. And since it's here, and since the father of the current owner of the club is our club vice president, and that's Ben. I'll introduce him in a sec. We get to use the space. I'm going to do a couple of minutes of introductions and things here before we get to the entertainment of the day, which is we're going to talk with Josh Friend, the editor of American Woodturner, and Don McIvor, the editor of Woodturning Fundamentals, the AAW's online publication. First of all, I want to give you a couple of ground rules here. Please silence your phone. We do not want your phone ringing. And if you take a call or if your wife comes and wants to talk to you, please mute your mic. I do not, as a habit, mute everybody just because I don't want to be all that controlling. So I leave it up to you to mute your mic and unmute your mic as you need to. We have a protocol here we're trying to establish. Those of you who are on Zoom, when you want to talk or ask a question or make a comment, you go down to the reactions tab on the bottom of the screen, the bottom right of the screen, and you click raise hand. What that does is bring you up to the top of my screen so I see you and I can call on you. The guys in the room have to do the same thing. They have to physically raise the hand so that Ron or Barry can hand them the talking stick, which is a dull scraper with a microphone taped to it. We are going to try a different mic and speaker system in a couple of weeks, but right now this is what we got. We got this 2-mic system coming in, so everybody's on an equal basis. You want to talk, you got to raise your hand, and I will be sufficiently fifth grade teacher to call on you to keep track as best I can. I'm going to just right now try something else. Here's the guys who are in the room. You can see them now, can you?
Yes.
Yep.
Say hi, say hello, you guys.
Hello, you guys.
You got Roy over there on the right, and the black shirt is Ben, who's the gracious vice president who lets us use this space. Barry next to him was our club secretary, and in the front row in the checked shirt is Ron. Ron has been a stalwart of our club since the very beginning. You want something made, you ask Ron or Barry, and they make it. It's astonishing how that works. Okay, I'm going to go back to I'm going to remove the spotlight, and I'm going to go back to the gallery view. And I think you should all be on gallery view as well. Yeah. Okay, next I'm going to introduce our speaker of the day, our main interviewee of the day, Josh Friend. If I can find his screen, here he is. I want to spotlight Josh now. This is Josh.
Hello.
Josh, the editor of American Woodturner. How long have you been the editor, Josh?
About 7 years now. Time flies.
I'll say. And how long have you been a woodturner?
I've been a woodturner since the early 2000s. Started when I was in high school in the mid to late 80s, and that makes me a spring chicken, I guess, right? But I always, I took high school shop and learned some turning there, and I decided someday I've got to have a lathe and a wood shop of my own, and that came true much later.
Would you like me to start showing some of your pictures?
Sure, you could do that.
Let's see if I can do that. There's just
okay.
Share screen. Yeah. And then I'm going to try to have you beside him here. And I'm going to try and enlarge you a little bit. Okay, I don't know what you guys see, but we see Josh beside. You want to talk to what this is?
You could just scroll through some of these. These are some pieces that I made. Here I was starting to experiment a little bit with texture, and I'd seen a lot of other turners doing it. And so this was one of my first. I haven't really done a whole lot of texturing and painting. I kind of usually favor the natural wood, but I decided let me try to do this, and all those little dimples in that band are just simply a ball peen hammer with just multiple hits on that took a long time, but it was fun. So that was kind of an experimental piece, flirting a little bit with texture.
How old is that? When did you make it?
Oh gosh, I don't quite remember. So it's probably around 2010 or 12, something like that.
Okay. And this one, another similar piece.
Similar piece, yep. I live in Connecticut, and this is from one of those kind of quintessential maples, old maples that were along the roadside, and someone had one taken down, and I grabbed a couple logs of that, and it was just a beautiful natural piece of wood, and kind of just made this sort of urn shape. Yeah, so it was one of my, probably around the same time frame.
What's the finish on that?
I generally use a wiping varnish. Learned early on that general finishes, salad bowl finish is nothing more than a wiping varnish that you can make yourself, which is, an alkyd resin varnish, thin 50% with mineral spirits. So it's thin enough to wipe it on. So I generally do that for a lot of my salad bowls and things like that, where it needs a durable finish, but it also shows the beauty of the wood. This is funny. One of the I was a stay-at-home dad. I have 3 kids, and so one of the things I did when my kids were little is I would go with them to this sort of Playtime Pals kids session at the YMCA, and we would go around in a little parade with musical instruments, and they had tambourines and all kinds of stuff. And one of the things they had was like a tone block, and it looked something like this. And I thought, oh, I could turn that. So I went home and figured out how to turn it. And this was the first article that I wrote for American Woodturner when Betty Scarpino was the editor. And the funny story is that I took pictures of making the project, and I wrote the article, and I sent it to Betty. And she said, yeah, this is good. I can publish this article. And she said, go ahead and send me the high-res photos for print. And I was embarrassed to say, well, I had a little digital ELF camera or something at the time, and I must have been shooting in low res because I had no idea, about what the requirements were for print publication. So I said, Betty, I'll have to make another one and shoot it at high res. And so that was my introduction to publishing photos. But it was my first article in the journal, and I was getting ready to call them knockers, and Betty said, nope, we shouldn't call them knockers. We should call them a tapper.
Well, you said that's your first article for the journal. You have some kind of an academic background in editing and writing as well?
Yes. I went and got a master's degree in English, and I was sort of heading down the road of being an English professor, and almost went on for my PhD in English. And all the while, I was also a woodworker all those years. And I decided not to go the academic route, and started getting some jobs doing editing. And so I was always an editor and writer and woodworker. And so, working with the journal and writing for the journal and editing the journal now is just the perfect fit for me, with an English and writing editing background, with a knowledge of woodworking and wood turning. So it's kind of my dream job.
Yeah. Now, before I go on, I'm going to just try something here. I have to tell you all, I'm on an unfamiliar computer. I've been on Macs for many years, and I'm on a PC, and it has things that I'm not familiar with. But I'm going to try that, but then I lose your picture. Okay, that's what I wanted to find out. But I can do that. That's maybe a little better. I don't know what you guys see at home, but what I see here is what goes on to the recording.
John, it's fine. It's fine.
And what's this?
Yeah, so I had a really good customer here in town, and he came back from Hawaii and brought some koa back with him. And he commissioned me to make a sake and sushi set with a rice bowl. And I made several, I'm not sure if this is the one in koa, but that was where I started with these. I made a few of these sets. And it was interesting learning how to turn thin with the chopsticks. I had limited success with that, and kind of, did a lot of sanding, and all these things were an educational process for me. The small dish there is for the soy sauce, and you get sake and sushi and so on. So this came out of a commission from a guy who commissioned me to do lots of projects with different woods that he brought back from places.
How did you do the chopsticks?
Well, that was a learning experience. So you get that the flex in there, and try to hold your hand behind the skew or gouge or whatever I was using, and ultimately just do your best with that. I was not using a steady rest, so I was kind of trying to firm it up with my hand behind it.
Did that work okay?
Yeah, it worked. It worked well enough. You be the judge there.
I've had the same experience. I always say the same thing.
It worked well enough. This was my son was in the Boy Scouts, and we had a pine wood derby. And I said, well, why don't we try making a turned pine wood derby car? And so this was a project that we did together, and it was a lot of fun. I don't think the car went very fast, but we enjoyed working together on that in my shop.
How big is that?
Well, there's certain regulations for pine wood derby cars, and I forget what the block is, like 6 or 8 inches long or something like that. But it's according to regulation. So this is from an article that I wrote for Betty. One of the last ones I did, I think, before becoming editor. Just the dry bud vase. I was doing a series of those and started to photograph that. Yeah, just again, my brother is a tree surgeon, so I would get all kinds of interesting woods from him, and he would bring over a van load of walnut or a van load of, this was a bunch of maple with some ambrosia markings and mineral streaks. It was the most dramatic maple I've ever seen. And so I was very, very lucky to have my brother in the tree business, and no shortage of woods to work with.
Josh,
Yes.
did you get a new camera at that point?
By then I had a DSLR and was taking some much better pictures. I learned my lesson quickly with that little digital elf that wasn't going to suffice.
Well, speaking of cameras, do you find that phone cameras work well enough for photographing?
They do. Phone cameras are excellent. High res pictures. I took a picture of this kind of wood here that was when it was still mounted on my lathe with my phone, an early phone, and Betty put that piece on the front cover. So iPhones and good smartphone cameras can take excellent pictures, and the challenge really is how do you hold that camera? And they make little tripods and so on to hold your camera, and that's always the challenge. And when I was writing articles, a lot of times I used my DSLR and with a tripod kind of looking over my shoulder, and I would put it in burst mode, so it's taking 10 pictures at a time on a timer. So I would say, okay, in 5 seconds, it's going to shoot 10 pictures. So I got the lathe going, and you're taking a cut just at the right time, and then you can select from those 10 pictures or whatever and choose the best for the article. Right, this is I was on the cover twice while I was still writing for Betty. This was a jewelry box that I made a series of these cross grain jewelry boxes with a lid and kind of partitioned interior. I don't know if I have a picture of that that I sent you, John, but that's what that was from. And that's a picture I took with my smartphone camera, just standing at the lathe, and just snapped a picture of it. And that was that beautiful maple, very dramatic maple. And at the same time, I was doing an article for her about drying wood. And she put that on the cover.
All right, I'm going to stop the share here. Now I see you big, but I want to go to gallery view for a minute. because I want to poll the room for questions at this point before we go on. And also, I want you to see how many people are in the room right now. I'm counting 6 by 6, 36 in the room, 36 screens in the room. There are 6 people in the room here with me, and we are using up 2 screens. So I guess there's 40, 42 people in the room here.
Well, nice to talk to all of you, and I appreciate the opportunity and the invitation, John.
It's a treat for us as well. We've been doing, as you know, a number of interviews with luminaries lately, and I've wanted to have you on for a while. Before we go to discuss the journal itself, I wonder if anybody has any questions about Josh's work that you want to ask or comments that you want to make.
I have a question, John. Doug Reeser, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. You said you got into the writing of it. Is it just a matter, I mean, you just decided to start writing articles and submitting them? How many articles did you write before, as far as opposed to have accepted at that time?
Right, yeah, I was always sort of inclined to document what I was doing. And so it was sort of natural for me to take pictures along the way and learn how to take good process photos and things like that and write up the process. It was just sort of a natural thing for me because I had, done some writing prior to that in the non-woodworking field and editing and so on. So I was always sort of in the documenting field, I guess. And so it was sort of a natural progression for me to do that. And then I was just very happy that Betty started to accept my articles and she found them useful. So that was kind of a good segue to get into the journal. Does that answer your question, Doug?
Sort of. I guess the question, because to me it seems like there's so much to write about, and how do you choose what you're doing? I guess what I hear you saying is you just sort of wrote what you're doing at the moment, and it seems to find general interest.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Sometimes Betty would ask me to write about something particularly, and commission me to write an article, and I'll do that now as editor, where there's some of it that's unsolicited. A lot of it is unsolicited submissions, and in that regard, what you see in the journal is really a wide reflection of what the membership is doing. Somebody's working on an interesting technique and they write it up and they send it to me. It's kind of a good reflection of what's happening in the field and what's coming through me as a filter. And then on the other hand, I'll have some commissioned pieces that I feel need to be covered. And so it was the same with Betty, and it's the same with me. So there's a good combination of unsolicited articles and commissioned articles. But also, it's very much for the AAW members and by the AAW members. It is really it's for Woodturners and by Woodturners. The authors are not professional writers. Their expertise is at the lathe, and so they have some things to share. And my job as editor is to help make that happen. And a lot of times I'm working as a writing coach and trying to help make sure that that all the information is there. And so that's part of the job of editor, is working with you guys, which is the subject experts.
Thank you.
Mike Peace has raised hand. Mike?
Yeah, I wanted to mention, it seems like a number of times in the magazines you'll have a theme, and can you talk a little bit about the challenge of getting articles that kind of align with a theme?
Yeah, hi Mike, good morning. Thank you. I try to do a theme whenever I can, but I don't try to force that. A lot of times it just sort of happens. I'll have a couple of articles in the queue, and I'll be able to sort of make connections with those. Like if there's a few different articles about vases, maybe I'll have something about hollowing, maybe something about embellishing, working on vases. And then if there happens to be some submissions for the members gallery that include examples of those kinds of things, sometimes it just sort of serendipitously comes together nicely. So when I see those elements, I'll pull them together and make a theme, but I never try to force that issue.
Well, you must know a lot of people and know what they can do and what they're working on. I mean, you must see hundreds of pictures every month.
Yeah, I do. And so it's, if I need something, I do kind of have a good network of where to turn.
And you have a bunch of writers who are reliable that you turn to regularly, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To be one of those.
Yeah.
Before I turn to Kai, who has his hand up, since we're looking at the gallery, how many people on the screen have written for the journal in the past? Would you just raise your physical hand if you've written a piece for the journal? I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Does fundamentals count?
Yes.
Well, and the next question is, how many people would like to write for the journal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, you see, at least in 7, Angelo's here too, at least in this group, we have a fair, as you could probably tell, this group is a mixture of Lancaster club members, local guys, and people from away who come in because they like our coffee hour. So we have quite an elite group here in a lot of ways. You can see down there holding this coffee mug up David Sloan, for example. David Sloan used to be the editor of American Woodworker magazine and also of This Old House magazine. So he's a heavyweight. Who else we got who's a heavyweight in here?
John,
heavyweight, also past president of the AAW board.
I think you can count yourself as a heavyweight in this space.
Yeah, I think so too.
Absolutely.
I don't know, but thank you for that.
Yeah, my weight's up too.
You know, I would just, let me just interject there, John, for those who raised their hand and said they would like to write for the journal, you know, send me an email, and or Don McIvor for Fundamentals, send us an email with your ideas. And I make it a point to answer every single email that I get. And I'll at least give you a thoughtful response. So if you have an idea you want to share, send it over. And you know, a lot of times I look at what's been published before. We try not to do too much direct repetition because we do have access to the archives as members. But certainly send your ideas.
And we'll turn to Don in a couple of minutes. But first, I've got 2 guys with hands up. Kai was first. Kai, you got the floor.
Just had to switch on my mic. Yeah, I wanted to ask whether there are any written guidelines for writing articles, like how many photos you want per page, or how long the text should be, or something like this. Or is it a good idea just to go by the current style that is used in the American Woodturner?
Oh, thank you. That's a good question, Kai. Yes, on the website, on the AAW website, there are getting published pages. So some instructions for what to do to get published for both the American Woodturner and Fundamentals. And those give some very general guidelines of how to proceed. But then when you get down to the nitty gritty of, you know, how many words and how many photos, then that's sort of a negotiation between us once we get started, depending on the subject and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Belcher has his hand up. Dennis?
Yeah, I got 2 different, hold on, I'm sorry, I apologize. Go on to somebody else, John.
Okay, I'm going to, since Don McIvor, I'm going to spotlight you for a sec, Don. We'd like to know where you are and what you do.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for the invitation to be here with you this morning. John started inviting me to this this weekly meeting. I live in Washington State, and it's 7:25. I'm going to pause for a second, see if my internet will catch up. There we go. So awfully early in the morning for me, but I took over. So I have a little bit of a similar story to Josh's in that I have been writing and documenting what I do and publishing about what I do for pretty much my whole career. And I've had a long-standing interest in woodworking. Started turning in about 2004, and a few years after I started and got some expertise, I started thinking about some things that I would like to write about, and so approached Betty at the Journal with some ideas and started a working relationship with her. And at about the same time, I offered Betty my editorial services, and she needed somebody. And so we started working together, not only with me writing and contributing to the Journal, but also helping Betty behind the scenes with editorial tasks. And when Josh took over editing the Journal, I touched base with him and talked a bit about my relationship with Betty, and we agreed to extend it. And so I did some freelance editorial work for Josh. And then the opportunity came up to edit Woodturning Fundamentals. And so I was interested in doing that and took it over from John, who had built a great foundation prior to me taking on editing that journal. So I've been at that for about 18 months now, about six editions behind me. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. And Fundamentals, if you're not familiar with that journal, basically the AAW was interested in having a publication which was more directed towards beginning woodturners. And so there was a little bit of a split or division in the
Your internet slowed down again.
it's kind of the line between the two.
So are you a professional woodturner as well?
Yeah, I guess depending on how you define professional, but I do market my work. I'm in some galleries, have been in a number of galleries over the years, some of which have come and gone, but I do market my work both through galleries and the web. And I've done some demonstrating, of course, as I mentioned, some writing as well. And I guess as long as I'm confessing everything, turning is not the only thing I do, but I also do some cabinetry and furniture making as well.
All right, so with that intro, I'm going to take the spotlight off you, and I'm going to go back to the main gallery view. And we still got, well, we're doing pretty good here. We still got 36 on screen. Belcher's got his hand up again. Belcher, you got another questions now for Don or for Josh? And
I actually, it's kind of for both of them when you're ready.
You're ready. Go for it, Dennis.
Okay, the question is, just out of curiosity, how many ideas a year get submitted, and then how many articles actually get submitted? And that's the first topic.
Dennis, I don't have a specific answer for that. I would have to take my best guess. I mean, you figure American Woodturners publish 6 times per year, you know, and there's only a limited number of feature article pages. So there's probably, you know, in each issue, there's probably maybe 6 to 8 feature articles, sometimes more or less, depending on the length of the articles. You know, I don't keep track of how many ideas are sent to me, but a lot. I would say a lot.
Okay.
An ample number, actually. I mean, and you know, an editor's nightmare is like what would keep me up at night is I've got to have enough material. And the worst case scenario is not having enough material when your timing comes along. But actually, you know, AAW members and Woodturners send a lot of ideas. So it's actually the opposite problem is that I tend to have a longer queue waiting, and we're published only 6 times a year, and Fundamentals is 4 times a year. So a lot of times articles do have to wait in a backlog.
Okay.
I can tell you also that there are 200 photographs in each issue of the journal, more or less. And of those 200 photographs, maybe a half a dozen or so have a lot of people in them, people standing around a table or something. About 100 of them are work in progress, and about another 100 are finished work. And the reason I know that is the comment came up a couple weeks ago here that there were pictures in the pop exhibition that, hey, where's the wood in that? So I did a little count, 200 pictures in an issue, 1,200 pictures in a year, and two of them were, oh, gee, they weren't wood. And I'm also reminded of an old friend of mine who said, well, wood is just congealed fiber anyhow. So what's the difference?
It's nature's composite material.
Exactly right.
Josh, how successful have you been in getting the archives caught up?
We are caught up. Thank you for asking that, Dennis.
Okay.
Both Fundamentals and American Woodturner. There was a little bit of a lag because AAW went to a new IT infrastructure a couple years back, and he's talking here about the Explore search tool on the website, where you can go in and search the archives. And there was a lag in terms of us keywording the articles, and we are now fully caught up. And so you go on there, you'll see what's in there.
The truth behind that is I used to do that, and for several years I set that archive up in the first place, and then for health reasons I had to quit doing it, and nobody was quite ready to pick it up, but they got it now. It's looking good.
Yeah, and along those lines, I would say that the AAW has a very limited number of staff, and they're stretched pretty thin. So this, sometimes something has to give, and that was it. But now we're caught up.
Okay, questions for Josh. Mike has his hand up again. Mike.
Yeah, this question I guess is for Don. I really appreciate the archives and the index that's searchable for American Woodturner, and I've used that a lot for trying to research things for my YouTube sometimes. But Don, is there an index for Woodturning Fundamentals yet for the archived issues?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mike. The journal Fundamentals is incorporated into Explore. So if you go online and use the Explore tool, the hits you'll get back include both American Woodturner and Fundamentals. There is not a separate like PDF index as there is for American Woodturner. And while I've got the bully pulpit, I just wanted to add on to something that Josh mentioned earlier, which is in reference to the queue and backlog of articles. I've gotten to the point with Fundamentals where I have a fairly consistent group of contributors, and basically, as each issue comes up, it's filling from these contributors, but I'm kind of working one issue at a time, whereas I think Josh has got enough material that he's several issues ahead in filling the journal. But I guess my point is that if you'd like to get your article to see the light of day sooner, come talk to me. The queue is a lot shorter at Fundamentals than it probably is at American Woodturner.
Well, that raises the question of what's the difference, really? How do you guys figure that out?
Well, I think I could speak to that a little bit. The way I look at it is American Woodturner has a lot of, and this is some of the things I just said in my latest editor's note in the June issue. It has a lot of ground to cover as a journal of a nonprofit association, right? You have news items from the association, you have chapter stories, we have an advertising well in the back, there's members gallery pictures and so on, and the tips pages. And so it sort of has a lot of different departments, if you will. And that kind of limits the ability to really focus on any one audience or skill level. And so one of the criticisms has been, well, there's not enough beginner stuff or whatever. So fundamentals kind of fills that gap, and it's much more focused on providing beginner level instruction and projects that are approachable, rather than having to deal with all the other stuff, the association news and things like that are not in fundamentals.
So while you're on that subject, what do you try to have in each issue of the journal? What makes a good, well-rounded menu from your
Right. Right. I mean, actually, that's a good point. The American Woodturner and fundamentals sort of have different goals. My goal really is to offer something for everyone, and cover all the other stuff, the tips, the news, and the chatter stories, the chapter stories. My goal is really to try to, when I get down to selecting feature articles, try to have something that is at different levels of expertise. You have the artwork, and you have a beginner level project, or a couple intermediate projects. Try to have a good balance of those, and it's not always easy to do. And I try to, I think that over the course of a year, over 6 issues, I'd like to think that I achieved that goal. You might not see it in every single issue, but it's my goal generally. Whereas I think the goal of fundamentals is really to focus on beginner level mostly.
And do you try to have an article about wood, an article about tools, an article about lathes, like that?
That is more how fundamentals is structured. I tend to try to have like an approachable, in American Woodturner anyway, a project that is approachable for beginners, or something that they can learn from. Like in the last issue, in the June issue, we had the multi-piece lamp project, where you don't need a long lamp auger. You can cut the stem of the lamp in sections and put it together. And so it's just it was good spindle skills and some faceplate skills, turning the base and so on. So a project like that is approachable. And here's another point, is that even if you see the articles in the journal and you say, well, I'm not going to try any one of those projects, even if you don't feel inspired to try that particularly, my hope is that you'll read through it and skim through it and find some little tidbits that you can use and transfer into a project that you're working on. You might see a mounting method, or work holding, or something that somebody's doing with a tool differently. So I think that you don't have to commit to trying the projects in order to learn from those articles.
How do you feel about tool and machine reviews, comparing brands, and what's the best lathe anyhow? What's the best carbide tool these days, like that?
Right, and this is a really good question, because as a journal of a nonprofit association, American Woodturner is very different from a commercial magazine like Fine Woodworking, or Popular Woodworking, or things like Woodworkers Journal, where we tend to kind of stay out of the muddy waters of tool reviews, tool comparisons. A lot of times advertisers will send me ideas for articles, and they want to have their products featured. And the problem is, we can't let it sound like an advertisement and show favoritism to one vendor over another. That's why we have the advertising well in the back, and they have their opportunity to present their goods and machinery and tools. But we stay out of the weeds of tool reviews and product comparisons, because we are not really a commercial magazine. It's a nonprofit association, and our mission is education. So if ever I have a choice, I try to lean towards the generic and the educational process, and let the products be in the ad well.
Well, since you mentioned the ad well, what does it cost to buy an eighth of a page or a full page?
I don't have that information right in front of me. We have an advertising firm that we use, Pierre Productions, and that information can be found in the journal, though.
Okay, I see Doug has his hand up. Doug?
Yeah, I was coming back to the question of beginner articles, because clearly beginner turners don't necessarily are probably also beginner writers and everything like that. So how do you choose the articles that you publish for the beginners themselves? I mean, who writes them?
Well, it could be potentially it could be anyone who has the expertise to write on a sort of fundamental level, and there are some authors that consistently do that. For example, right now I'm working on an article by Walt Wager, who has written for both Fundamentals and American Woodturner, and this is about turning a mallet. And he also produced a video to accompany the article. But it could potentially be anybody, who, if you're making a simple project, Beth Ireland did an article about a turned whistle. If it's something that is sort of simple and shows fundamental skills, tool presentation and things like that, it could be anyone doing it as long as it's done well enough with pictures and so on.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any more questions? Mike has his hand. Before I come to you, Mike, I'm going to look around the room and see and push on anybody else who's got questions. Do your raise hand so we can come to you. Okay, I see down here below. Who is that? Bob Mather. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I've got a question. It's I'm not sure if I'm in the right forum. It's an ethical question. You were mentioning how many pictures come up in these magazines and so forth. Are there any constraints in terms of, I mean, you see these pictures and you go out and you do one just like it. Are there any constraints in terms of is it a matter of once it enters the public domain, it's fair game? Or do we only enter ethical issues when you try to put someone else's name on what you made?
Bob, that's a really good question. And maybe Don has some comments about that, but I think you're talking about copying and sort of infringing on someone's style, right?
Or just what they did. Sometimes I'll get a picture and I go in and measure the picture, build some ratios, and then put it on the lathe. And one of them turned out pretty nice, I have to admit. But it's like how far. It seems like if it's public domain, is it fair game?
Well, my answer to that is I think that it's fine to copy whatever you see in the journal for your own purposes and for learning. We copy the experts, but I think that the ethical part of it comes in where if you start to copy someone's style or someone's signature, features and try to sell that, or try to enter competitions with somebody else's style. So in other words, if you do it for yourself in your own shop and your family and friends, I think it's okay to copy because that's how we learn. But I think that you cross the line when you start to try to make money from somebody else's ideas.
So if it's a novel approach to something, that's what you're talking about? Or is it just that you take a picture of a certain bowl and you say, well, that's nice. I like the way it's cut. You go ahead and do it. It's no big deal, right?
Yeah, you can use a bowl. I mean, the bowl's been around for forever.
Distinctive. If it's a distinctive type.
But if you have somebody who has a distinctive style, like let's take, for example, I mean, Betty Scarpino's sculptures, right? They're very distinctive. And when I see a Betty Scarpino piece, I think that's a Betty Scarpino piece. If you want to copy that to learn some carving skills, I think that's fine. But if you start to try to sell pieces that look like Betty's, then I think you've crossed a line.
Thank you.
I asked David Ellsworth that question one time because he basically invented the globular hollow form. And a lot of people do that. And he said, well, I think I'm always going to be better than the rest of them,
Probably right.
That's David.
Mike Beach, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I want to comment about how briefly the journey I had in writing, because I'm not a writer. I've got a degree in economics and an MBA, but I always did a lot of business and professional writing, but never had anything published. And then I got solicited by Joe Herman to do, based on a picture I had on a forum of something I turned on one of the forums. And I said, okay, and I did it. And like Josh's issue, I had a little Canon ELPH and it wasn't good enough. So I had a friend of mine with a better camera come over to take the process pictures. And when I got paid, I bought a nicer camera. And and then I did another one for wood turning design. And then after that, I thought, well, gosh, I've had a couple articles published. Let me give American Woodturner first right of refusal and move up the food chain. And I've been fortunate enough to had some good success to have a number of them published. And when I hear these comments about the magazine is too artsy fartsy, and I hear that comment personally, my reaction is, well, they've got to hit a broad audience, and I've had a dozen articles published, and I'm not real artsy fartsy. I'm pretty basic, so all my articles were pretty basic, and I try to give them that kind of response.
Well, thank you for saying that, Mike. I appreciate that, because that is a frustration. I hear that comment too, and in reality, I look at what I'm publishing and I try to do a good balance. I think, John, you recently did a little survey of the last year or so, right? And what did you find? I mean, it was sort of that same thing where there seems to be a gap. There's an impression that it's too artsy fartsy, but if you really take a close look, there's actually a balance in there.
Well, my observation is people seize on something that they don't like for whatever reason, and that becomes the whole journal has gone to hell. And when I actually look at the journal and I look at a year's worth of issues, I find a tremendously wide range of material. I find articles that are really serious discussions with artists. I find articles that are with professional turners who are pounding out a living at it. I find beginner stuff. I find projects that I probably am never going to make. But as you point out, and I know you do this deliberately, most of those projects have a technique or a gizmo or a way of chucking that is more broadly applicable than what's in the article on the page. So there's always something I can pull out of that. I think there's I think I accused you recently of not having any articles about professional turners, and you came back with a list about as long as your arm. I mean, what I really meant is all the professional turners you write about are artists, and that turns out to be not true when you look at it. So there I was guilty of the very same thing, seizing on something and saying it's all gone to hell. But when I took a close look and actually did an analysis, and I used to do this for a living because my background is in editorial magazine management, I find nothing to criticize in your balance in the issues. There is always something. There's always something there that is of interest to me, and I think of most guys if they take a good, honest look. Now, what you won't find is an issue that's, if you're a pen turner, you're not going to find a whole issue about pen turning. But a couple issues ago, there was a cover on pen turning that was really an interesting bunch of techniques presented. You're going to find one or two things in an issue that are right up your alley, and one or two things more that, that's kind of amusing or interesting, and one or two that I hate that. I'm never going to do that. That's crazy. And I think that's a good success. I think that's an editor's goal, is to both please and annoy every reader in every issue.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that, John. I appreciate that. And it brings up the point that the journal, when you receive your journal in the mailbox, a lot of people think, oh, that's my value that I get from the AAW. And if there's not something in that particular issue that I love, well, then it's a failure. And the thing is that the value of your membership goes way, way beyond just fundamentals and American Woodturner. You can go online and use the index and explore the archives. And there's so much, the archives goes all the way back to 1986. It has David Ellsworth's journal number 1. And so if you don't see something in that issue that just arrived, that's not all there is.
I also find the archives are real strong, and I know as much about the archives as anybody because I helped build them, but I find stuff in there whenever I'm trying to solve a problem in the shop. I do two things. I go to the archives and I ask Barry and Doug, and between those three sources, somebody's going to have an answer for me every time.
Yeah.
I have a comment. I fall into the category of, I hate that and I'm never going to make that. But I did want to say that when I was on the board, the journal, we were reprimanded as board members for referring to the journal as a magazine, because it's never intended to be a magazine. It's always intended to be a record of the AAW through time. So if you look at Journal 1 through the journal that's current, you'll see the progression from very simple articles to very complex articles.
Yeah, Angelo, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that too. I think people receive the journal and they want it to be like wood turning design used to be, or more wood turning. And it's not that. And I always tell people, you're right, Angelo, when you say it's not a magazine, it's a journal of a nonprofit association, and it has different things it has to do.
Karen,
I would also,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
can I have a comment, John? There's really two different approaches, and John could speak to this based on his experience, but there's two different approaches to putting together a publication. And if you're something like American Woodturner, where you have a staff and a budget, and you can come to that with a vision and say, well, this is what I want in the next issue. Now go find me some writers to make that. Versus the AAW's journals, which are all member contributed. You know, we have articles coming in that we need to think about how they fit in the big picture and then work them in. And it's two very different approaches to creating a publication. And so this is a little bit flippant, and I don't mean it to be that way, but if you pick up one of the journals and say, I don't like this, well, then I would challenge you to write something that speaks to what you think should be in the journal, and come to me or Josh, and we'll work with you to develop the idea.
Oh,
Exactly right, Don. Yeah, Betty used to say that when somebody would complain to her, she would be like, well, what do you want to write?
Well, I also know as an editor, I can make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, you know. Whatever you give me, if there's an interesting kernel of information in there, I can make it work on the page.
And John edited one of my articles and turned a pig's ear into a sow's ear into a silk purse.
Good to work with. You had great information. Karen Drennan, you're on. Can you show us your picture, Karen? I know it's okay if you're, you know, all muddy from working in the yard. Karen, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I just have an ethical question. I'm on the board of my local wood turning club, and all the members of the board are members of the AAW, but not all the members of the club are. If we see an article in Fundamentals or in the journal, how would we go about sharing that article with the rest of our membership? Is that allowed ethically?
That's a great question, Karen. Thank you. I mean, we have to sort of do that on a case-by-case basis, because ultimately we want everybody to be an AAW member and pay their dues and then have access to all the articles. On the other hand, the AAW has some responsibility to support the chapters. And, you know, we sometimes provide information for a chapter newsletter, or have, you know, a select number of, actually with my club here in Connecticut, I'm a member of the Nutmeg group. And they recently said, well, can we put these articles on the website for all of our members to see? And what we ended up doing was saying, well, here's a few articles, and post those with, you know, an invitation to go to the AAW website and learn more and ultimately join. So it's something that we could do on a case-by-case basis, but we wouldn't share articles all the time freely with non-members. We just can't do that.
So who would we contact for permission to reproduce an article?
You can send an email to me.
Thank you.
Yep, it's editor@woodturner.org.
I have a slightly different point of view on that, having been editor of commercial magazines as well as nonprofits. My point of view is every page ought to have contact information for the magazine, and any Xerox or PDF of it needs to carry that information on the proven idea that it falls into somebody's hands and they like it and they come and they want some more and they join. It's a way of promoting. It becomes promotion. Now, if you take it and you publish it in a book of 20,000 copies, that's a different issue. But half a dozen PDFs for your club members, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And also we encourage authors to publish, you know, I'll send you a final PDF when it's all done, encourage you to post it on your website or on social media, because that's free publicity for the AAW. And, you know, always with the permission line and a link to the website, you know, and try to encourage people to join. It's free publicity.
But got three more hands up here. I'm going to go to Bruce, who was first. Bruce, what do you got?
Well, first of all, I'd appreciate Karen's question because I've had that exact same issue where there's an article in Fundamentals I want to distribute to the 75 members in our club, and I usually don't do it for just that reason. So I found that helpful. So at least I know where to go now. My discussion or question is a little different. Josh, you kind of referred to intellectual property rights in a way. And I'm not an attorney, so let me say that out loud, but I've done a lot through my career of dealing with intellectual property. And, you know, patents, the first way to invalidate a patent is to publicly disclose your invention, number one. And number two, it covers use, it's not just sale. So your framework for it's published in the journal and you cross a line when you sell it, there is no legal definition in this country that covers that. Now, you may say that crosses an ethical, artistic boundary, if you will, but if it's in your journal, I can't see how anyone could expect a restriction of someone not to sell that exact thing.
Right. Yeah, Bruce, I think you're right, you know, from a legal standpoint. If it's out in the public domain, you know, if somebody does a demonstration of something, you can go ahead and do it, you know. So I think you're right that it's more of an ethical, like kind of a respect. Are you crossing an ethical boundary rather than a legal boundary?
Thank you.
And you're also on the foundation of the AAW, which is Woodturners sharing information among Woodturners. So we don't want to restrict that in any way.
Right.
Randy Smith, what do you got?
Yes, I had talked to Betty Scarpino at one point because I liked a small article that was in under the from our readers section, and I asked her if I could reproduce it and distribute it to our club, and she said, "Fine, go ahead." And I appreciated that.
Yeah,
it's a courtesy to ask, though. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we appreciate that, and most times we'll send you the PDF, and you can use that.
Actually, she did.
Oh, good.
You still got the floor. You done?
Yeah.
Okay, Doug.
Yeah. My question was more along the article lines. There's times when I've seen articles in the which are wood turned to start with. And I swear that the person in the article spent an hour on a lathe and 3 weeks carving it afterwards. At what point in time does it become a wood carving project as opposed to a wood turning project?
Well, I mean, people would say that altering wood on the lathe is a form of carving. So are you carving right from the beginning? And that's a good conversation to have, but I know what you mean. You're talking about carving and embellishing after the turning, and it's just that's an artistic question. But I think, you know, some of these exhibitions that we have that Tib Shaw puts on, there's a member exhibition and a pop exhibition from the professionals. I think one of the criteria is that it has to be at least in part turned on the lathe, and there's really no definition of how much that is versus carving and so on and so forth. It's really what does the maker want to do to achieve what they want to do.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I really do enjoy those articles too. So I'm not really slamming the idea too much. It just, for me, the ones I find the best are when they don't appear to be turned, and then they show you how it was all done on the lathe. For example, like Theobald, where he's done those square kettles and stuff like that. And you say, that was turned on the lathe? Like, my goodness.
Right. I know. Yeah. Thank you.
What do you got? Dave?
Yeah, I just want to say how thankful I am for this very informative session and perspective from looking at the magazine, and thank everybody that's involved. I thought this was very interesting. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it.
Dave, you took the words right out of my mouth. As we sit here at 11 o'clock, and as you guys mostly know, we start on time and we end on time. So thank you, Don. Thank you, Josh. And thank you, everybody who had a question. And thank you, everybody, for putting your interest on this program today. And we'll hope to see you all next week on the Lancaster Woodturners Weekly Coffee Hour.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
John.
Thank you.
All right. Have
See
a
you
good
all
day.
later.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.